A mountain road is shown on which a luxury car is driving. There is a couple in it, a young beauty in a wedding dress and an elderly man. The girl is happy, because she stole his heart, and he loves her and hid her from the bad world. We see a house set amidst mountains, trees, and blue sky. The couple is met by the housekeeper Claire and a young boy whom the owner calls Oliver. Elizabeth admires the beauty of the house, huge glass windows, coziness, and comfort. At the entrance, the girl sees wonderful flowers, white orchids and lilies, and also realizes that Oliver is blind. In the evening, a fine dinner and a sumptuous table, the learned servants stand obediently, and then a night of love. In the morning, a husband leads his young wife through the house. The man shows her rooms, pictures, and precious objects of art. Here is a luxurious dressing room with fashionable outfits for the girl, and here is a modern kitchen. One room is more beautiful than the other, but all the doors have biometric locks. In one of the corridors, Elizabeth sees a frosted glass door and asks Henry what is located there. The man says that it is not allowed to go in there. The girl objects, because there are locks all around and she can't go in there anyway. Henry says that all the biometric scanners are set to the parameters of two people, her and Henry. The next morning, Henry leaves and Elizabeth is bored. The girl swims in the pool and walks around her new home again. She asks Claire why Henry married a simple girl like her. But the woman gives no answer to that question. Elizabeth spends the day reading books, trying on her dresses and jewelry, and dancing in front of the mirror. In the evening, she notices Claire and Oliver sneaking out of the house. Elizabeth is tormented by insomnia, and she leaves the room, wanders around the house, and does not notice how she comes to the forbidden room. The girl's curiosity overcomes common sense. Elizabeth goes inside, and behind the door is a room resembling a laboratory. There are sensors and devices everywhere. The girl presses a button on a panel, and suddenly a door opens and a glass capsule rolls out, inside which lies the body of a young woman with a hose in her mouth. She appears to be asleep. A frightened Elizabeth rushes to escape but grazes the table and hurts her finger. In the morning, her husband arrives and plays the piano for Elizabeth. The man notices that the girl is thinking about something. Henry sees the bandaged finger and asks what's wrong. The girl tries to justify herself, but the man understands everything. At night, Elizabeth pretends to sleep. The girl hears Henry going into the forbidden room. She sneaks after, but suddenly Henry emerges from the darkness. The man accuses his wife of disobedience. The girl tries to justify that she did not see anything forbidden, but her husband explains that the fact of her disobedience is important. A frightened Elizabeth tries to run away, but she runs into closed doors everywhere, while Henry follows inexorably in her wake. The man catches up with her on the stairs, grabs her leg and throws her down, then beats her with an iron poker. Next we see Henry, Claire, and Oliver digging a hole in the lawn, and dropping something in cellophane into it. After the funeral, everyone sits around the table. Claire asks to be told that it's over, but Henry says it's not over. 6 weeks pass, and we see Henry bring Elizabeth's doppelganger into the house. The same conversations and the same actions, and again Henry asks not to enter the forbidden room. The young wife promises to fulfill her husband's request. They love each other again, with Claire watching them from the darkness. But at night the girl can't sleep again. She walks around the house and finds Claire sitting in the kitchen. Elizabeth talks to the woman and she is curious about everything. One question after another arises in the girl's mind. Claire tries to warn the girl about something, but Henry enters and takes his wife into the bedroom. In the morning Henry leaves and asks his wife to be an obedient spouse. The girl walks around the house and tries to summon Claire or Oliver, but no one answers. Elizabeth is bored, and she is again engaged in trying on clothes and jewelry, night swimming in the pool, long looks at herself in the mirror, and then plays the piano in the living room. She is also drawn to the forbidden room. The girl enters the forbidden room and runs out of it screaming. At night, the young girl has a nightmare that a glass flask girl, very much like her, has emerged from her sarcophagus and has come to her room. At this time Henry arrives and sees that his wife is very frightened. The wife runs to the bathroom, but Henry realizes that she has disobeyed him too. The man rushes in, grabs her, and a scuffle ensues. But the girl breaks free from her husband's grasp and runs away. Henry chases her all over the house. Going into the kitchen, the wife takes a knife and the husband a tampon with ether. The man sits down at the piano and begins to play, and the girl relaxes. But it is a ruse, for a record is playing, and Henry sneaks over to where Elizabeth has taken refuge. The man grabs the girl and puts a tampon to her face. It seems that the girl has given up. But suddenly Elizabeth stabs him with a knife. The couple lies on the floor in a pool of blood. Elizabeth comes to, but Henry is already dead. Elizabeth scrubs the floor and tidies up the kitchen. The girl wraps Henry in a cloth and loads him into the elevator. After that, she washes herself, throws away her wedding ring, and burns the soiled clothes. The girl calls the emergency services, but she does not know her address. At that moment, Elizabeth sees Claire and Oliver walking by and pretends that everything is fine. Seeing Elizabeth alive and unharmed, the couple is dumbfounded and the girl says Henry is resting upstairs. Claire goes into the kitchen and suddenly collapses, having a heart attack. The lady reaches for the phone and calls emergency services. Claire is taken to the hospital for treatment. Afterward, Elizabeth tries to leave, but Oliver says he can't protect her if the girl walks out the door. The guy realizes that Henry is already dead. A frightened Elizabeth tries to justify herself because it was self-defense. But Oliver calms the girl down because he himself hated Henry and will help to deal with this problem. A guy asks her what she remembers from her childhood. The girl says that she was in the hospital for a long time, her parents died in a car accident, and she grew up in an orphanage. Oliver shows her a house nearby and says that's where it was and they grew up together. Claire knows better since she was the one who worked with her. Elizabeth wonders who she is. Oliver informs her that she is one of the 6 clones of Henry's wife, namely number 5. The girl is shocked. She has a real hysteria because she wants to go back to the honeymoon. Oliver advises the girl to get as far away from here as possible, and the money can be taken in the safe. The girl goes into the house and packs up her things and money. Oliver enters with Claire's diary and asks to read it, and while the girl tries to make out the handwriting, Oliver locks the doors. Elizabeth doesn't understand what's happening. She begs to be let out, but Oliver is adamant. Out of desperation, Elizabeth starts reading Claire's diary. The girl learns that Claire received Henry's invitation to work with him because she was a genetic scientist. When she arrives at the scientist's house, she gets acquainted with Henry and Oliver. But when she finds out what she will be doing, she is very frightened because she finds herself in the middle of a tragic love story, inexplicable and impossible. Henry reveals that his wife died shortly after Oliver's birth from a very rare disease her genes suddenly generated. Her grief-stricken husband cloned her cells and recreated 6 copies, but the disease manifested in them as well. To buy time, Henry built cryogenic chambers and put the bodies there in anabiosis. By the time Claire joins the project, there are only 4 of them left. The scientist gets to work and decodes the disease gene. Meanwhile, Henry records messages and plays music to the subjects. The man hopes this will shape their memory. But the new Elizabeth doesn't remember anything more than a few seconds and suffers from it, for she has no real inner peace. One day she entered the laboratory, and in terror she ran away. The girl was found by the police and brought to Henry's house, where Claire recognized her as his sick niece. Then the girl's strange accusations were written off as a mental disorder. The girl is distracted from reading her diary by the arrival of Oliver, who brings her dinner and asks her to behave. But Elizabeth pounces on him and demands the code to the door. Oliver calls the code, but it turns out to be wrong. The girl wanders around the house looking for the guy who has already escaped. She goes to the lab and there she sees Oliver, who is processing the body of the next, 6th Elizabeth. He asks her to help him with the 6th clone, at which point he gives her a shot of sleeping pills. The girl sees the memories of her predecessors, and in the morning she wakes up in a room chained to the bed. It is impossible to free herself, and she continues reading Claire's diary. The lady recalls how they continued the research, but a week later the clone died. Claire realized that the disease had resumed and she had failed. Henry was desperate, for he had failed and had wasted so many years, During this time, a relationship develops between the two of them. Oliver enters the room again. The guy wants to know what Claire writes about him. Elizabeth tells him that Claire fell in love with Henry after the third clone died. The lady didn't know that Henry had changed the samples, which means that Claire's mistake was not. She did manage to stop the disease after all, and the remaining clones are healthy. Oliver says that as a child he admired Elizabeth, for she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen, and then he could see. The children became friends, much to Henry's dislike. One day Oliver saw Henry kissing the girl, and that night the man blinded over. Having told all this, the boy left, and Elizabeth continued reading the diary. Claire wrote that she herself ended her connection with Henry, for Elizabeth was impossible to compete with. In addition, Henry talked about his pain after losing his spouse, and now he longed to relive that first wedding night. Claire found no record of Elizabeth giving birth and realized that Oliver was not Henry's son. Turns out it was Henry himself, and he made it because he was afraid Elizabeth wouldn't love him in his current guise. In the morning, Elizabeth wakes up to the touch of scissors on her neck. Oliver demands to know what Claire wrote about him in his diary. The girl confesses that Claire thought he was a clone of Henry himself. But that's not true, because Henry showed his birth certificate, so Oliver is not a clone of Henry? Elizabeth asks if he loves her and suggests that he touch her. The girl removes her pants and beckons the guy over. Oliver cannot withstand the temptation and approaches. He hugs Elizabeth, but the girl throws him to the floor and chokes him with a chain. The guy has to give the girl the keys to the chain and tell her the real code to the door. But then Elizabeth enters the room. She takes aim with the shotgun, and the girls look at each other. They are completely identical. Oliver tries to convince the new Elizabeth that the one in the room is sick, that she is an imposter and their enemy. The fifth Elizabeth objects and says that's not true, that she's a hostage and she just wants to leave. After listening to Oliver, the sixth Elizabeth orders the other to lie down on the floor, but the fifth covers herself with Oliver as a shield. The sixth does shoot, but the bullet kills Oliver and wounds the fifth. She tries to run away while the sixth clone sobs over Oliver. The wounded girl walks out of the house, and in her head all the visions and images that passed in front of her clones are mixed together. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out. It's the last clone of Elizabeth, shooting her doppelganger. One last breath, and one last vision of herself leaning into her face. In the morning, the last clone reads Claire's diary. Henry hands over all of his possessions to Claire, and now she can continue her research. The man says he never intended to kill the one he wanted to resurrect his whole life, it just so happened. Now she only brings him joy by dying over and over again, and no one needs to know about it. These clones, not his Elizabeth, and only by destroying them does the man feel they are real. Henry will do anything to end this. Elizabeth finishes reading diary. She sees a cab pull up to the house and Claire gets out. They meet at the door, and Elizabeth gives the diary to Claire. The girl walks down the road and tries to forget her terrible dreams. And the dream she's had all her life, where she's with a beautiful man, and she stole his heart, and he loves her and hid her from the bad world, but she doesn't sleep anymore. This is the end of the movie. Thank you all for watching this video to the end. Give this video a like. Write in the comments what you think about this movie, and see you in new videos.